Hello everybody and welcome to another Unitator YouTube video. Today we will be discussing the Matilda IV, the Tier 5 Russian premium tank. Now this tank was introduced in August of 2015 as part of a special bundle in the store which is sold for $10 on the North American server. Now, the first thing you would want to notice about this tank is a little bit about the history. Of course, this Matilda is the British version of the Matilda, which is then exported to Russia, or rather the Soviet Union, as a Lend-Lease tank, and therefore became the Matilda IV. Now, this tank is classified as a medium tank, although it does have the armor and speed of a heavy tank. So do not be fooled by its classification as a medium tank. So now let's look at some of the pros and cons of this tank and also compare it to the other members of the Matilda family, including the Matilda Black Prince, another Tier 5 medium tank, and the original Matilda, the Tier 4 medium tank. Now, the Matilda IV. Obviously, it uses the chassis of the Matilda, the Tier 4 tank, so while its armor is quite good, it can bounce quite a few shots, especially with these extreme angling. It will not be as effective as it was in Tier 4, as this tank is now in Tier 5. The turret cannot be relied on very much. You do have a very, very strong spaced armor gun mantlet, which we'll go more in depth into Armor Inspector later. But otherwise, the turret cheeks are weak, and of course, you have that bulging cupola on the top of the tank. Now, let's talk about speed. This tank, it seems faster than the original Matilda, the Tier 4 tank, having a top speed with the top engine of 24 kilometers an hour, whereas the Matilda IV has a top speed of 25 kilometers an hour. So it is slightly faster, and it seems to maintain the speed better than the Matilda over soft terrain such as sand or swamp, such as in Port Bay, etc. But otherwise, do not rely on this tank to move around very quickly, so you cannot reposition very quickly. So choose your positions, knowing what you're going to do there, knowing where you're going to be after you get there, and know generally where your enemy's going to come from, because you cannot commit to one flank and then spend the entire battle crawling back to the other flank while your team dies off, of course. Now, after we've covered, of course, now the speed, let's talk about the armament. This tank, the Matilda IV, uses the Tier 5 gun, the 76mm ZIS 96 gun. This is the same gun as on a stock KV-1, or the intermediate gun on the T-34 Soviet Tier 5 medium tank, my bad. Therefore, it's a pretty decent gun. You have a really nice rate of fire at 7.55 rounds a minute with a decent alpha of 160, but your penetration is really low at on the 86, and even its APCR rounds are tough to penetrate harder targets like KV-1s, T1 heavies, and some of the Tier 6 heavy tanks as well. Its APCR, as I've stated, does not give that much of a boost at only 102 millimeters of penetration. Now, the dispersion is what you'd expect of a stock Tier 5 heavy gun. You really need to get close and personal, but it doesn't matter if you miss or bounce a few shots, because its rate of fire definitely makes up for that fault. Another thing that you would want to notice with this tank is that it has 1.7 seconds of aiming time. Now, this is actually amazing compared to the Russian standards of the T-34 and the KV-1. So you do have quite a good gun, although you will need to carry a fair amount of APCR in order to penetrate some of the heavier targets that I've mentioned, such as the KV-1, T1 Heavy, Churchill 1, M6, and so forth. Now, you can already notice, of course, since it uses the Tier 4 Matilda chassis, that it's quite a small target. That, combined with its high HP at 700 hit points, makes this tank very good to survive in. You can last quite a long time, take a few hits from all kinds of tanks, bounce shots. They'll miss their shots if you move back and forth when you hide most of your tank under, say, a ridgeline. And that is really the most distinctive feature of the Matilda IV over any of the other Matilda family. This tank receives 14 degrees of gun depression, only 1 degree less than the Dicker Max, and 25 degrees of gun elevation, meaning that you can easily work over ridge lines, pop shots over ridge lines, aim up at people on hills, which makes this tank very suitable for fighting in a hilly terrain, and also popping peekabooming out of cover in, say, a map like Mines or Middleburg, where you can use the hills as cover. Now, about equipment and consumable and ammunition loadouts. For equipment, I run my standard equipment loadout when the vertical stabilizers are not available. Of course, this is a tier 5 tank. So I use the medium caliber tank gun rammer, the improved ventilation class 2, and the enhanced gun laying drive. Essentially what this does is it increases your crew skills, helping your tank out in almost every way. It increases your reload speed by quite a significant margin, helping you out with even more punching DPM out of your gun, and also a little bit of aiming speed boost, as while the aiming speed is really good for Russian tank, you will have trouble comparing that to, say, a British or American tank of the same tier. As for ammunition loadouts, as you can see, the shell price for the AP rounds is dirt cheap at only 56 credits per round. But the APCR rounds are quite expensive, even considering that they have not so stellar penetration to begin with at 2400 rounds. Nonetheless, I do like to carry a fair amount of APCR, as you can see on this tank, because when fighting heavily armored targets, you need to have some APCR in order to break through that tough armor. As for consumables, I use my multi-purpose kit, my adrenaline, and my extra rations, which is my standard loadout for almost all of my tanks, as it improves your crew skills, helps you out in tough situations with adrenaline, and will allow you to put out fire, heal crew members, and repair modules as needed every 60 seconds. Now that we've taken a look at this tank in the actual garage, let's take a look at Armor Inspector to see exactly what this tank stands out for. Now, this is the Matilda IV, of course, in the collision model. As you can see, we have spaced armor, of course, the side skirts, but also on the gun mantlet there. Now, if we look at the armor penetration, I am looking at the Matilda IV via the Matilda IV's own gun, the 76mm ZIS 96 gun. As you can see, its armor is not quite stellar at this tier, facing tier 5 and 6, but it can still deflect a fair amount of shots, especially if you can angle it at angles such as these, where you can do that, and keep your sides hidden via side scraping. Now, looking at the turret itself, as I mentioned, you have the spaced armor of the gun mantlet, but as you can see here, the turret cheeks are quite weak at only being 77mm of effective armor, and also, of course, you have the bulging cupola at also 77mm of effective armor. If you look at the APCR penetration, this makes the tank even easier to penetrate. You can go through the front plate, very little area of bouncing there. And so, as you can see, that's essentially what most tanks in your tier is going to see with AP or APCR. You cannot rely on your armor as much as a tier 4 Matilda, but in the worst of situations, you can definitely rely on it for bouncing a few shots here and there. Now, going back to the garage, let's compare this tank with other other Matilda family members. Looking at the Matilda, as you will probably notice, it has 10 degrees of gun depression, so it's pretty decent in terms of that. It has much more effective armor because it uses the Matilda chassis at tier 4 rather than tier 5, so it does have the best all-round armor of its tier. You have the very good rate of fire, which although it does slightly out DPM the Matilda IV, you can definitely peekaboom a lot more with the Matilda IV, as you have that alpha damage advantage over the Matilda itself, with that 160 versus 60 or however much the 2-pounder gun gets. You can see that I use the same equipment, same consumables. I do like to load some APC on the Matilda gun, although the 2-pounder does have really nice penetration, which is another major difference between the Matilda and the Matilda IV. You have much better penetration tier for tier with the Matilda than with the Matilda IV. You do have, as you can see, you do have a different turret with better spaced armor, however you do still have that giant cupola on the top. Now, let's compare to the Matilda Black Prince. Now, this really is the black sheep, actually, of the Tier 5 premium community, because very few players actually enjoy playing this tank due to its larger size turret, which is very weak. It's the same turret as on the Cromwell. It still has an excruciatingly slow speed that the Matilda and the Matilda 4 have, and bad power to weight ratio, meaning that it cannot climb hills very easily. You also, same problem with the Matilda, you use the Matilda chassis at tier 5 rather than tier 4, once again limiting your effective armor. This tank, however, does use a different gun. As you can see, it uses the tier 5 6-pounder Mark 5A, which it delivers quite a punch if you can manage to keep your rate of fire up on the enemy. As you can see, you have an 18.18 rate of fire with a 90 alpha damage. This means that you can easily whittle down enemies, and you have a much better DPM than the Matilda or the Matilda 4, assuming that you don't get killed before that happens. Now that I have covered the basics of the Matilda 4 tank, let's look at some gameplay. Unitator here, and so as you can see here, we're on mines, and this will be my first commentary video for gameplay. Now, I went over all of the basics of the Matilda 4 in the previous section of this video, so I will be purely commentating on my actions within this video itself. Now, as you obviously, since the Matilda is slow, I want to get into strategic position first, and as we are on mines, the obvious strategic position is the center hill. So we trundle our way up the slope, and as you can see, we're a bit faster than the tier 4 Matilda, so you can get there a good bit earlier than if we were in a tier 4 Matilda tank. This Panzer III-4 is just admiring the new shiny tank, this green Matilda. But it seems that we take the hill without any fights, since all of the enemies in this battle will flank around the map, which is a terrible strategy. You should always try to go for the hill. It provides you with view range over almost all of the map. It provides you with the high ground so you can defend easily. But if you flank, you're open from both the bottom and the top. You can only get there so fast. The enemies will take key positions first. You don't have as much view range as you would. So generally that's not a good idea. Plus, by being here, I can use my 14 degrees of gun depression to its maximum effect. As you can see here, we barely need to take out our tank, like barely peek out over cover in order to fire onto the enemies below. And that it really is, as I've said before, the standout feature of the Matilda IV tank. It's amazing gun elevation and depression at 14 degrees and 25 degrees respectively. So here you can definitely see the bad penetration values of the gun come into play. Even a slightly angled E8 or Fury can bounce shots off the front, but the sides and the rear, of course, are so much weaker. Where here you can see that we can barely penetrate the side of a KV-1 at the flat angle. Now, the Matilda IV, oddly enough, has quite a slow repair crew, which is odd since I have my repair skill all the way maxed, of course the crew skill's maxed, and I have all the equipment and consumables, but you know, we just use a repair kit, and now we can continue pummeling the enemy. That is an unlucky bounce off the back of the Panzer III-4, but I think we had hit the angled part of the armor, which would have deflected any of our shots. And so we are just peek-a-booming out of cover, trying to expose as little of our tank as possible, because we want the enemies to see only the turret, because the turret, while penetrable, if you manage to hide most of your tank, you will have much better success either making your enemies miss or making the enemies bounce. And so that's what we do. We try to expose as little as we can. We try to control the major key points. We use premium ammunition as necessary, but try to use standard ammunition if we have the backs and the sides of the enemy vehicles. We try to use your armor to maximum effect by side scraping and angling by wiggling. And we try to demonstrate how the gun, although low penetration, does perform pretty well with that high 7.55 rounds a minute and at 160 alpha damage. So as you can see here, this was my ace tanker game at a 18,000 plus damage, and also having a very good number of kills. And I believe I also did about 1,000 spotting damage in that battle, which is why we got that mastery. Now, moving on to this replay, we are on Winter Malinovka, which is the Russian map, Winter Russian map. And just like the key point in the last battle was the center hill, the key point in this battle is the windmill. Because the windmill gives you advantage over the town, it gives you advantage over the ridgeline that extends over to the lakes. If you can control the windmill, you can send out some tanks over onto the ridge and give them firing support. You have view range, you have very good line of sight, and you have really good hull down cover and also side scraping cover because of the windmill itself and the side rocks to the side. And so here we're just slowly inching towards the windmill. And another thing to note is the Matilda has decent view range, but it's not great, meaning that you really want to rely on your teammates to spot for you, and that you really want to be up in the action so as to not camp in the back, especially with this gun with the .41 dispersion. And so we're trundling through. Basic tip for noobs: try to drive in a straight line if you're trying to get someplace far away, because it'll get you there the fastest, as you won't lose speed traversing left and right. So here we aim at a poor Hetzer, who is just immediately blown to smithereens. And the T14, even though it has only 50 millimeters of sloped armor, making it about 100 millimeters effective, even our APCR rounds struggle to even find the spot to penetrate it. And actually, I was really lucky on this shot, managing to get it through that machine gun port weak spot at such a distance with this kind of gun. That's an extremely lucky shot on my part. But we're relying on our team to spot for the enemy, to try and distract the enemy so that they can give us our sides. And now I decide, I'm tired of being so far back, my dispersion is a bit too much for me, I'm going to move forward. And so I have this Churchill behind me as well, and we are charging at the enemy. I try to fire clutch, but it just derps into the ground. But, with this kind of rate of fire, it doesn't matter if you bounce or miss a few shots, as I've stated in my review portion of this video. And so now we're focusing in on that Panzer III-4. We pre-aim where he's going to be, and we managed to hit him. Now, a thing to note about the Panzer III-4 is, since it does use a Panzer III turret, you can pen the turret back with HE, just as I did, and with slightly higher caliber guns, you can pen the entire back of the tank with HE. Here we try to sneak a shot into the T-14, although we were a bit far away, we do manage to get the kill on it. And the A-20 just feels as if his time is over. YOLOs, we immediately just take him out easily, just shotgunned him. And now it's a race to find the Panzer IV. Panzer IV being the Tier 5 German medium tank. We find him way there in the lake, completely out of cover, and now he's just going to be completely blown apart by our team. He's facing almost all of our team, all of whom are almost in that region, and he's out of cover. So he's easily blown up. We secure 4 kills, and we win the battle. Now, this battle is only a second mastery, but I did want to include this because you can see the sheer damage output that this tank can do. But please drop a like or a subscribe down in YouTube. I greatly appreciate it. It's what keeps my channel going. And do keep updated because I will be adding my M48 and also T62A gameplay reviews very soon now that I've gotten my Ace Mastery gameplay on tape, finally. But once again, thank you for watching, and see you next time.